Hello, friends, fans, and followers. Welcome back to another episode of Tales on Trails Deer Tracking Podcast. Today we have Albany, New York tracker Dave Madore joining us. Dave stumbled across the podcast and actually sent me a note. My first fan mail, Dave. Thank you. Sent me a note saying he liked what we were doing and my little hobby podcast here, just rambling about tracking. So I asked Dave if he'd like to come on. So he did, and Dave is an experienced tracker, so I always look for the opportunity to talk to experienced guys that are willing to come on and share their stories. And Dave will talk a little bit about his background, and we'll roll through a series of topics, one of which, he's trekking in John Giannini's backyard, so he's got some connections there that will be interesting to hear about. So Dave, welcome. Thanks for coming on, man.
No, thanks for having me, and it was great to stumble across your podcast, and I think the piece of fan mail I sent you I was impressed with your honesty about where you are and how you got there and how difficult it is, right? I don't think everybody's that way, right? I think there's sometimes our egos get caught up and get in the way of certain things, but
that's true. I say if you're a man, you have an ego. It's just a matter of how you
check, right?
Keep it in check. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that feedback, because I do try to do that. I know that it can be perceived, me as a first year tracker, I have no tracks in the graph, 42, that's nothing, but I do have, we practice a lot, I study a lot, I work hard, I seek mentorship, I talk to a lot of people. So I do think transparency is very important. And so I appreciate that feedback. I just want to get better and have fun. So,
yeah.
So Dave, tell us about yourself, man. Where you tracking? How long you been tracking? What kind of dog you using? How old's your dog? What's your dog's name? Well, just man, tell us about it, buddy.
So this will be October. Will be our 6th year. So I still fumble a little bit with the word experience, because we're learning so much. Every year. This was our 5th year. And I think I probably learned just as much as I did my 1st year, my 5th year. We're seeing some success with the dog. He's really made some good strides. So Winston is my dog's name. That's what we call ourselves, D&W Tracking, Dave and Winston. He's a tackle. Cool. So I tell people he's literally born for it, because our deer season opens October 1st, and that's his birthday. So he went on his first track when he was 1, and that's his birthday present every year. We sit by the phone just waiting for it to ring and hope and pray that we get one that first day, and that's usually his birthday
that's awesome. That's awesome, so,
man. I kind of stumbled into it. I actually, this little picture behind me there, that's my Weimaraner that I had for like 13 years, and
beautiful
just
dogs.
A good dog, that one dog that you get in your life, and kind of he had bad leg as he got older, and was just looking for something to do with his nose. And I stumbled across John's book, not knowing anything about anything, just, hey, this sounds like a dog's nose would work for. And I was always so impressed with my wine's nose, and it would tire him out so much more when he got his nose on the ground and that huffing and trying to do stuff, So I'd read John's book and kind of put it away. My dog at that point was getting older and older, and just, it wasn't going to work out. And he finally passed, and then didn't have a dog for a couple of years, got some kids at that point, married, and huge bow hunter. And I put a bad shot on a deer, hard quartering to me, surprised me. Hard quartering to, shot him, and he went out there 75, 80 yards and stood, and I could see, it was a bad shot. He wasn't feeling good, and he stood in the same spot for half hour probably, and got dark, and he finally walked off, and I went over there and didn't see a drop of blood where he'd stood for a half an hour with my human eyes, and I knew I was in trouble. I didn't connect the dots right away. I had actually gone home and started talking to a buddy of mine, and God, I just said, I remembered just tracking in general, and I called my wife and I said, there's a book in my office with this little bitty crappy dog on the front of it and a dead deer. Like, can you take a look at that and see if you can find anything? And she picked up John's book and said, yeah, this guy, John Genene, and deer search. And here's a phone number at the back of the book. And that was my first run in with John. I called him at like 9:30 at night. And he answered the phone.
He tracked for you then.
Did not track
Oh.
for me. So he offered me what did you do wrong? Why are you calling this late? Is how he answered the phone.
Okay.
You know, he knew that it was a call for help, and you know, he wanted to know how bad I had messed the track up at this time 30, and we were just getting around to the phone call. So he informed me at that point that he was no longer tracking. I think he was probably in his 70s at that point, early 70s. This would have been 7 years ago, and he had a dog, Tommy, who's, you know, anybody that's a tackle guy knows that whole breed line and, you know, their breeding program, that he was letting another local guy who had his license track with, that Tommy was getting up there too. And it turned out that guy wasn't available, but they had just sold a puppy to a guy from my hometown. And when I say I grew up in a small town, I mean small, like graduated with like 35 kids, you know, K through 12 in school. Yeah. Like, I got to know the guy, right? Like, there's no way I don't know him. Turns out he was from town next door, didn't know him. Jared Brueggemann, great guy. Well, he shows up the next morning with Winnie, wired-haired dachshund. And I'm like, Jared's this big 6'5" dude, you know, and here's this little dog. And I'm like, what are you going to do with that? I don't know. You're my first track ever. Here we go. And I wish I could say I was confident when we hit the ground, but you know, and we got out there and we got into a second cut hayfield. It was probably knee high, and you know, little dachshund out there jumping, trying to get through the grass. I'm going to the guy that owns the farm. I'm going, there ain't no way. This deer came from the swamp. He's back in the swamp. There ain't no way. You know, we're 20 minutes into this. We haven't seen anything. And about the third time I said that, Jared said, well, maybe he jumped out of the swamp and came up here and dropped this piece of blood here in the middle of this field. He shows me one little dime-sized speck of blood out in the middle of that field, 400 yards from where we started. And I just said, I'll shut up and follow the little dog now. Yeah. And we did. And, you know, she stumbled in a couple places around an apple tree where there had been a whole bunch of deer that night, you know, but she got through it and took us across the county road and to a part of the property that I've been hunting that piece of property for 20 years and never even really been over there. And she got right to this hedgerow and laid down. And I said, what does that mean? He said, I don't know. We backed her up to the last 75 yards, and she walked right to that hedgerow again and laid down. But this time when she laid down, we all got close enough. All these crows flew up on the other side of that hedgerow. We knew what was up then and stepped over, and the coyotes had destroyed that deer right from his ear to his butt. There wasn't anything left of him. And Winnie, that little pup, she didn't want any part of that coyote smell. You know, she didn't want to go to the other side of the fence. But so that was my first exposure. That was, I think I shot that deer November 4th. We found him November 5th. And December 5th, I was in Alabama picking up my dog. So 30 days later, I was committed to it. Was just the coolest thing I had ever seen. And I was hooked at that point. It was, you know, unfortunately, Jenny's time, you know, John wasn't getting a little up there and they were slowing down on their breeding program. And they already had a list of people, you know, above me that were on the list for pups. So I just wasn't ready to wait. They were great. And they helped me meet a guy out of Montgomery, Alabama, Stanley Thrasher, and he had a set of pups ready to go. So I flew down and picked up pup and drove him back and started training and was just hooked, you know. So that's kind of how I got into it.
That's way cool, man. That's an awesome story. So, you know, I have a big old bloodhound right now, year and a half, and I love the bloodhound. They're goofy, they're obnoxious, they're a major pain in the butt many times, but I just love her to death. And I've already find myself thinking about what do I want for my next dog. You know, they're only going to track for 8 or so years, you know, and you know, and I keep thinking, I'm already thinking about the next one, and these Teckles, you know, a lot of great people have them, and they are just ferocious, determined, driven little snots, man. I you know, I'm not sure if I'd go that small or not, but what's that?
Yeah, his prey drive is just through the roof, right?
Yeah.
Like most people talk about like
crazy.
When you're training a dog, it's either, they have to really want to do it for you, right? The tracker, they want to make you happy and proud, or they got to have, like, my dog could care less that I'm on the other end of that lead and I'm happy, right? Like he wants to get there and tug on that deer's butt more than anything in the world. Like his prey drive is just, and it can be scary, to be honest. I mean, like, I've got a little bit of property. The kids running around with a 4-wheeler, and he's our house dog too. He's never on a leash except for when he tracks, but he'll go out and he'll chase that 4-wheeler. And if you don't pay attention, he'll run himself to the point where he could hurt himself, and get a nice warm day in the summer. He just won't stop. He's got that drive for him for sure. And it was hard for me to buy a 20-pound dog, it was hard for me to, I was a big dog guy in my head, but when I got hooked that quickly, I was, how am I going to not mess this up? Right. Like, I don't know anything about training a dog to track. I was pretty good about training my dog, but that was to sit, stay, come, go, maybe flush a bird here or there. He was really good obedience dog, but training him to track, like, and in my head, I just like, wow, that little pup was so ingrained in him, that would be the least thing that I could mess up. And that's how we ended up together.
So speaking about training, how did you go about it? Early on when when you're fresh too, you got a pup. What approach did you take to get it started, and then how has your training progressed, and what lessons have you learned that are worth talking about? I know there's a million of them because I got a million of them in my 1 year doing it, and you've got 6 years. But as you progress through, what are some of those big chunks of elements of learning and leaps forward?
Yeah, it's not as scary as I thought it was, right? Like, now that I know it a little bit, right? I was really, really worried that I was going to mess this up and go out there and make a fool of myself, right? And I asked a ton of questions. I mean, there's guys that I've never met and probably don't even recognize my name. Gary Blessing, Al Sherman, Ron Siffler, Doug. You think I asked all those guys questions. I just became a fanboy on Facebook, and anywhere I could find anything that they were doing, I just shoved it in my mouth and hoped that some of it stuck, right? And got some deer parts and started with just a stick and going out there and laying a quick early line when he was young. We had together, me and the dog, we had about 8 months to get ready, right? I got him in December. So back around to late September, we have an early doe season that, I was trying to, if somebody could shoot one and give us some training like we would. So we had about, 10 months there, 8, 9, 10 months to get training in. I was laying a couple lines a week when he was young. And I don't know that I was making it too fun for him. That was the wrong thing to do at such a young age. I was really trying to push him. And then like he nailed every one. Like I got to the point where I'm like, this is almost silly. Like, this dog is going to find every deer that it's in the woods. Right.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know at the time was, it's also smelling my boots and my pants and my sweatshirt that's hanging in the house every day that he sleeps next to, like it was super easy for him. Right. Like I was associating that deer smell with a whole bunch of other things he was already used to smelling. And it was great. And I'm not saying he didn't get anything out of it. He certainly did. Right. All the praise, reward at the end of the track. Great. Yeah. But I did start to learn, like, it's not as easy as these practice tracks make it out to be, like when they start nailing every one, he was getting around a year old and I was having trouble kind of fooling him, to be honest. And now I know, God, I probably should have waited till it was a really warm day, right? And let it burn off some and then go try it, or, wait till the wind did pick up and then really, give him something to struggle with a little bit. But most of my tracks I'd lay at night and wait, 10, 12 hours and go out and he walked to it pretty easy most of the time. And so I got fooled myself, and kind of what we were talking about before about being honest, right? I kind of ran into some podcasts and some information where these guys were tracking with little, 9-month-old dogs and finding 30 deer a year. And I was like, man, after my first year, I'm like, I've done something completely wrong, because I went on 16 tracks and found one deer, right? Like,
yeah, right.
You know, like I must have messed this dog up so bad that he'll never find another deer, you know. And
I'm familiar with that sentiment.
Yeah.
Feeling that way.
And it took some guys telling me, and like hearing other guys that have been doing this for many years, right, saying, "Oh, the average is 33% or 35% or somewhere around 40%," right? I'm like, okay, well, I can live with that, right? Like I can, I can understand that my year-old dog shouldn't be at that national average, right? Like maybe he's a 20% dog, but can he get to a 40% dog? That gives me hope, right? That I can just keep working and get there. And ultimately that's what happened. But, you know, it really did throw me for a loop. And that's kind of why I reached out to you. I was really impressed with your self-reflection of your first year and being willing to, you know, throw your numbers out there and say where you struggled, right? I think that helps people. And I think it helps.
I appreciate that, man.
Tracking as a whole, right? Like folks love it, right? I have people that talk to me all the time, right? When they see me, oh, how's Winston? You know, I tracked for this guy or that guy. And, you know, we talk about tracking all the time. And I get people every year that like, hey, I want to do this. I want to do it. Right. And I'm all about helping somebody. The next tracker wants to come through. I have had a ton of help. I'm willing to help them as much as I possibly can.
That's awesome.
Don't expect to go out there and find 9 out of 10 deer every time you go out. Right. Like that's not what's real. Right. And you know, it's work and you got to put some time into it, but it's well more rewarding than the work in my mind. Right. But that's a different question for each person.
That's true. Yeah, a good season you can expect to find 3 out of 10, right?
Yeah, like this past year,
3.5 out of 10 or whatever to get to that 30%, that national average. You know, and I'm with you. You know, depends on who you talk to. It's going to be 30 to 40%. So I always say, it's about 35% is the national average.
Yeah, and there's guys that this guy out of Western New York, Bob Yaks, runs this dog called Thor, another wired-haired dachshund, and Bob's in his early 70s, I think, and he'll do almost 200 tracks in a year. Like he's just a machine. And I think they found like almost 80 deer this year, you know? And now Bob can filter his calls a little bit. He's in a section of New York that's a really, you don't think about New York as being a big buck state per se, you know, it's not the Ohio's and Illinois, but our western part of New York, there's some really good deer out there and there's some really good deer hunting out there. You know, the ratio of deer per square mile out there is almost 6-fold from where I am in Eastern New York. Right. So you know, if we find a 115-inch 3-year-old here, that's a really good deer. Right. They're finding 150-inch 3-year-olds, you know, out there. But Bob has built up such a base out there that he can screen some of his calls. Right. Like, he's getting, you know, he might get 30 calls during the rut in a day. And if he hears liver, right, he wants to go help somebody that he use his time to find deer. Right. I hope nobody takes it that I'm knocking Bob Yaks, because that's the farthest from the truth. But he has that environment, right? He can answer those calls and say, well, this one I think I can help the most with. Let's go help that person. Right. And then try to pass them on to other trackers. So here, I don't filter much. It's can I get there, right? You know, this past year, a little bit more, you know, the high backs, the shoulders, little penetration shots. But early on, it was just about experience for the dog. I still took 60 tracks this year. I think 60 last year and somewhere around 60 the year before. We're encroaching 250 tracks total, you know. But most of it's been the last 3 or 4 years as people kind of get to know you and trust you and kind of get your name out there. But if it's within the time frame that I could go and do it and get it done, that's about how I filter the calls, you know. But I think the average could go up for some guys that have the ability to filter a little bit. But even that, I think Bob's a stat guy, so he keeps track of, before he leaves the house, do I think we're going to find this deer? Yes or no, right? And even that, you can see at the end of the year how good he was at filtering his calls. Maybe he was 10% better, so now he recovered 50% instead of 40%, right? Yeah. So.
It's interesting, and a number of things you've talked about there. You know, I'll start backwards and comment on them if I may. You know, you talk about how you feel your chances of recovery based on the call. I didn't keep much last year, just, the number of tracks I went on and, whether it was a gun or bow or crossbow, and I did that as part of the Michigan Deer Tracking Network. Just, we were kind of keeping those things, or many of us were. But this year I've changed it up a little bit, and I've created a Google form so I can go in and just click some stuff. And one of the things that I'm going to try it, we'll see how it goes, but is probably, how I feel, what I'm calling my probability of recover, below 50%, 50%, or above 50%. I thought I'd try that and just see, just like what you said. So kind of gauge my, be able to quantify my assessments of the interview based on the information, on the recovery. So
I do the same exact thing. My spreadsheet gets bigger every year, right? Like when I first started, it was the same thing. I went here, we looked, we went this far. Did we find it? Yes or no? And now my spreadsheet is, 20 columns of data points that I just, I get a kick out of looking at.
Yeah. My problem with 20 points of data point, I won't have the discipline in the heat of the season to fill it all out. So like I created that Google form so I can, and I have the link on my phone. I can just go on there and and I have everything. So it's just 4 or 5 clicks and that track is entered, and then at the end of the season, or throughout the season, I'll export it to an Excel document. And then we'll see, as it evolves. Like I said, I'm still kind of figuring out myself, but you talk about filtering the calls, and that's Michigan. We get there's a lot of deer in Michigan, and there's some decent ones, and some good bucks, but we're not a big buck state either. But there's a lot of deer, particularly in southern Michigan where I am. I'm a second tier counties, just an hour from Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, and the guys told me, my mentors told me this, because I didn't want to be that guy that was cherry picking calls either. I was trying to figure out, I don't want to cherry pick, but I don't know if I wanted to be dragged through Jurassic sized briars by a bloodhound on a high shoulder that we know is going to live, but so I was struggling with that. And then what my mentors told me, said, look, early on, just go, take what you can, get that dog experience. I said, that's a great point. That's exactly right. So we went, but they said, as the season gets on, you're going to have to screen those calls for exactly what you just said. You don't want to be chasing a high shoulder for 2.5 hours that you're not going to recover and miss 2 livers, or a liver and a gut that you can recover. So, as things get busy, you have to be a little bit selective, and by no means is that ever an intent to pad numbers. It's just a matter of helping hunters, and that's how I approach it. I want to help. I love doing it, so I want my numbers to be within the national average. I want to recover every day we go on. I know that's not going to happen. It just doesn't happen. But I also think that I can do better than I did last year, and I know I can. I demonstrated some of that in my after action review for the season and what I talked about. But so there's a balance there. You've got to, and then as the late season comes on and you're not getting called, maybe you can go on those less than 50% chances just to get out there. I love doing it. Let the dog work. Yeah. And hell's bells, you never know, man. Maybe you will find a deer.
October 1st, I tell people, I tell people that are close to me, I say this same little stupid spiel every time. You live so close to me, like that's where I want to be. Like I want to be the guy that my local hunters can rely on, right? And we've chased deer with just a couple inches of penetration, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, we're wasting your time." I'm like, if you hit one in the ear and he puts a drop of blood on the ground, you call me, right? And we'll come out and we'll make you feel good that we did everything we can, But you get into the middle of the season and you're getting 6-7 calls a day. For me, that's our hot season. If we get mid-November, I'll get 7-8 calls a day as the 3 or 4 hot days there around whatever weekend it is where, the rut starts. We'll get 7 or 8 a day there. I can't do 7 or 8 tracks a day. I just can't do it. Right. I've done 4 a couple of times in a day and then turn around and do 3 more the next day. But it's, at that point it starts to wear on you and you're like, man, we're going to get through this. And then our late season comes around, man, when's the phone going to ring? When's the phone going to ring?
Yeah. You kind of the art. Yeah, I get it, because I was finding that myself. I was jonesing and anxious to go, and was looking to. I was watching. Our tracking network has a private chat. People can post tracks on there. Anything is. Oh man, I think I want to take that one. Just to get out there. But I was also a little reserved because, I was new to the network, the first guy, and I was scared to death, and I didn't want to step on people, but I wanted to get out there. And then as the season went on, I'm like, oh shit, I hope I don't get a call today. Or I'd kind of like to just take this evening off. But then as the season wound down, it's like, man, I want to get to 40 tracks. I was thinking, I want to get to 40 tracks for the season. And I ended with 42. So yeah, it's just funny how that goes. And I'm really looking forward to this season, I built a little bit of a following, and maybe I won't track for the guy I tracked for last year, but I'll track for his buddy maybe. And, and one of the things that the guys, my mentors told me too, is your recoveries as you go will increase, because simply by the fact you're tracking for people you've tracked for before. So they know how to manage your track.
Sure.
So it gives you a better opportunity. They're not going to jump that liver shot deer 5 times and get him 4 properties over that you can't go get. They're going to know to get out of there and call you right away. And a properly managed track obviously increases your odds. So I'm really looking forward and anxious to see how that goes this year, and how this year is different from last year. What? Everybody tells me you'll notice a big difference in the dog, and and what I'm looking for is a big difference in me. How I'm approaching it. What did you notice? Did you notice any big difference from your first year to second year?
Yeah, certainly. First year, I probably took some tracks I shouldn't have. It's kind of odd, even being where we are, right? Like in John's home base, there's not a lot of trackers. There really wasn't when I first 5 years ago. Like I said, Jared's dog was a year old, so his dog's a year older than mine, and he lives 40 minutes from me, maybe an hour from me, right? And we're pretty close, and we try the things that are in between us, we're constantly hopping back and forth. But other than that, there's a handful of trackers on the list, and they all have lives, right?
Sure, yeah.
Softball games to go to and work, and most of them take a dozen tracks a year, right? And so it's I had my plate full right from the jump, and I probably took some that I shouldn't have. I was always honest about it. This is where we are. We're first year. This is what we're trying to do.
Yep.
But there wasn't a lot of options for them, right? There just wasn't that many people. It's grown a little bit. We've added a couple of guys in this general area that are picking up some more tracks and, getting a bunch of experience. But I didn't have any trouble finding them, and I didn't say no to some that I probably should have, and because of that,
right.
You have those scenarios where you leave one in the woods and you're just kicking yourself,
I don't like that.
Yeah. But from year 1 to 2, my confidence went up considerably. I jumped because the dog went, his abilities went up. I know people post all the time about how great their 9-month-old dog is, and, they find deer all the time, but you can't tell me a 9-month-old dog is as good as a 3-year-old dog. That same dog will be better when it's 3 than it was at 9 months old, right? It's got a great ability, but experience is going to make it the dog that's going to find that other 10%, right? That
experience is the best teacher, man. There's no question about it. Yep.
So, I certainly did notice a jump from 1 to 2, but the jump that he made from 2 to 3, that's all I could talk about. Like, I'd tell people, like,
really? See, and I've had people tell me that too.
And he did it again from 3 to 4. And I would say right off the rip from 4 to 5, he's improved every year for sure. Right? He's just gotten slower. And part of that, I'm saying he's gotten better, but I've gotten way better at reading him, right? Like, what does this mean when he's doing this, right? because I'm talking the same language, or at least can understand partially what he's trying to get me to understand, it's become easier for me. So my confidence goes up, right? Like I start all my tracks with telling the guys like, hey, we're here to help you find your deer. I can't tell you if we're definitely going to find it or we're definitely not going to find it. There is no, never say never and never say always with deer, but we'll do everything we can to try to help you. But this is what to look for, right? Like that deer's dumping stress out, and he's going to get out there 150 yards. And if he's mortally wounded, he's still going to be dumping a bunch of stress, right? And that's what the dog is. That's how I relay it to people, right? Like he's tracking stress, right? Interdigital gland, deer dander, blood, all that stuff. I really believe it's a math equation, right? And they know it's this particular answer, right? And I'll tell them all the time, right? Like your deer gets out there 150 yards and you find a big puddle of blood. And then after that, it peters out and there's no blood. That's because that deer did what deer do. They run away from danger. They stop, collect themselves, figure out what's going on, and walk away from danger at this point, right? And now, we're not dripping blood. There's no blood there. And I said, but, if we get out there at 150 yards and this dog has still got his nose on the ground and he's working intensely, you can see that he's working. We got a good chance that we're still on him and we're going to keep going. And we're going to keep going until we bump him, we run out of property, or he stops acting like that, right? And I said, if he starts, I call it bird doggy. Like if he gets bird doggy, he starts jumping off the line all over the place, and my dog gets a little more agitated, right? He gets a little more quicker. He's got his head more and he's bouncing across the line and he may come backwards more, but he's not straight line tracking at that point, right? Now that scent it's getting harder for him for one reason or another. Now I've learned that we struggle with gullies here, right? I call them a gully. It's a gorge, creek, whatever you want to call it, a ravine, right? We have them all over the place here, right? And we get to the edge of that ravine and that scent settles down in the bottom, and he's going to go to the bottom of that ravine every time, whether that deer is down there or not. Like it's cool down there, it's damp, and there's a pool of scent down there that he's got to go figure out. And we struggle with that here, right? And I struggle with it because we get down there and there's no blood and there's no sign of the deer, and he didn't slide down the bank like we did to get down there. I would say that was one of the big things too with training that you were talking about before that I've learned that I made mistakes on is when he was young and he struggled, he's a 20-pound dog. I'd pick him up and I'd haul him back, right? To do the restarts, I'd pick him up and I'd haul him back to where I wanted to restart him, and I'd restart him. And I did that so much the first couple of years that I think it wasn't, I never let him problem solve long enough, right? We'd get in set pools. And I know we wouldn't be in the right area because the hunter told me that, we still haven't gotten the last blood yet. But it's pooled down in here. And now I know why we're down here, but I didn't give him time to work it out. I would pick him up and go, right? Where that would have been a really good training exercise, right? Like I didn't lay that scent pool. That's a real scent pool. I should have spent 20 minutes, half an hour there if the hunter was okay with it. But 20-pound dog, you pick him up, you haul him back up the hill, and you set him back down, and away we go. So those things I wouldn't do the same with the next dog, right? I'm certainly learning even on how to train a dog, but that certainly was one of the big mistakes that I made.
Yeah, no, that's experience, man, and that's what experience does for you. And I'm learning those things too. And like I say, most of it is from talking to people like you, talking to my mentors, watching those videos, reading the books, listening to the podcast. But problem solving is one of my absolute favorite things to watch a dog do, and it just really in patience. It's so hard for me to trust that dog early on. Now, I don't want to say it's easy for me, but if there's no blood and I don't know where the deer went, I'm going to just follow the dog because I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm just, she's doing something and she's tracking. So I'm going with her. So I trust her, but working through those scent pools and that problem solving, that is just so satisfying, so gratifying to me. I just absolutely love watching her do that. Maybe to a fault. I don't know. But, our first recovery was, I've talked about it 100 times, worked through this scent pool, and it was early October. And I'm like, and it was supposed to be a training track for us my buddy said, "Hey, my brother-in-law hit a deer. You want to come out and track it?" I go, "Heck yeah, man!" So we head out there, and it didn't take long before I started to become suspicious. And then when I found the wound bed at about 120 yards, I'm like, "Uh-oh, your deer's still alive." And then she has a tell when she gets hot, starts getting vocal and really hot, when we're on live deer. So we backed out, went back, and she started her at the shot site again, walked right past that wound bed and a little further through a scent pool. And, we're not much blood at all at this point, nothing in this grassy area. And she popped out the other, and I didn't know what to do. So I'm just standing there watching her, holding on the lead, just trying to not let it get tangled, let her do her thing. And she popped out the other side of that grassy area into that wood lot, and there right on the edge was just this tiny little speck of blood. I go, by God, there it is. And that was a eureka moment for me. And then she'd done that a couple of times on some deer we found just waiting. And I'm like, man, this is so beautiful. I just love watching that problem solving. So I'm an impatient person, so I have to remind myself to be patient, and then remind the hunters. I'll tell this: as I was tracking one deer, we didn't recover this deer. This track was an utter mess. They totally trampled this track, and that's a whole nother story. But we were tracking, and the hunters with me, and we got into this area where she started problem solving. She's working around, and I just stood there with the hunter. I said, okay. I says, either your deer has wandered around here a lot, or there's been a lot of deer, something. There's something in here that she's working through. I said, pretty soon, I said, she'll pick a line and she'll exit out and we'll go. And we just stood there for probably 5 or 6 minutes, talking with the hunter, and pretty soon, whoop, she popped out the other side. And the hunter said, oh my God, she did. And it turns out she was tracking his dad, where he had walked through everything, and it was public land. So she tracked us right back to where Dad parked. Yeah. I'm not sure that deer was dead, because it got really weird. But anyway, just that problem solving is so fun. And when I do training tracks now, I try to build a problem solving, and I got to get better at it. Much like what you said early on, you're built too easy at tracks. I've got to get better at it. My dog is struggling with age tracks right now. 24 hours old. She is struggling in as much as she can smell the line. She's demonstrated that. But when she cuts a deer trail, there's this much fresher. This is more fun. So that's where I told you I posted in that real popular tracker out of Illinois, accomplished incredible tracker out of Illinois, commented and provided some feedback on that, and sent me video and showed, offered some suggestions on how to do that. Sure. So, that's my focus here up through the season is getting her to focus on those 24-hour lines. And, now we had a few of those last year, and I didn't notice her doing that as much as I could tell anyway, last season on real tracks. And so I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out, is she bored because she knows it's a training track? Is she lazy and doesn't want to sniff hard to find the 24 and these are more fun? But she's demonstrated ability to do it. So I just need to, and then we talked about the scent cocktail, when on a real track, I'm using scent shoes. So I have, 6 inches of hoof. So I'm using a total of 12 inches to lay a scent trail. Now that's not counting the man scent, but, let's talk about deer scent. I've got 12 inches where I'm missing the other 150 pounds of the deer and all of the other scent cocktails. So I'm hoping that's part of it. I'm not worried about it, but it bugs me right now, and I want to work through it. And I'm working with another tracker in our network. We're going to start working together to work through some of that.
Some of it's probably just adolescence in the dog as well, right?
That's what I think too. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, my second year, he took a huge jump from first to second year, and it was great. But I bet you I came home on a dozen different tracks my second year, and I'm like to my wife, take this dog to the pound. Like, he was useless out there. I don't know what he was doing, right? And it was asking too much of him sometimes, right? And again, I wasn't that experienced either, so I'm out there looking at blood. Oh my God, this deer got to be laying dead within 50 yards of us. Why can't we find it, right? And obviously know now that don't mean anything, right? But
right.
Come home because he would just, even on a restart, like he would get to the point where maybe he was bored. He just didn't want to do it, right? He'd take a line, and we'd advance the line, and we get to a certain point, and we'd just be like, okay, I don't think this is right? But let's confirm by going back to Last Blood and restarting. And if he comes here again, now I've got confidence, right? Like I'll keep following. Yep. But I'd get him back and I'd start him at Last Blood, and he'd sit there and he'd look at me like, what the hell you want me to do? We've already done this, right? Like, I don't want to do that again, right? And
he'd
straight the hell out of me. And I think some of that was just adolescence with him. And as he got more and more, at that point in time when he was doing that, maybe we had found 4 or 5 deer total or something, and as it became like, oh, this is what there's a dead deer out here somewhere, right? Then after that, like, he marched to the end of the earth. He hates to stop.
Yep. On those tracks where he would just sit and look at you, did you recover those deer or not?
Most time not, right? Most time you don't recover deer, period, when you go out there. But I have one that I extremely remember where, we scent pool now. I know what a scent pool is, right? Deer went down over a ravine, and we went down in there and tracked good and come up to this high side, and he bumped a pile of deer off of a side bank right up next to a house. And I could see like 9 deer taking off, running through the woods. And they were so close to this house. I'm calling the hunter and being like, these just bumped some deer. I'm afraid that he's on a live deer at this point, right? And that's what he wants to go do. So we got to bring him back, right? And let him kind of calm down and restart him. And plus, I didn't know where the property line was. So I took him back and restarted him. And he took a very similar line and got down in that bottom. But this time, he kind of merged left and stayed 40 yards from the other trail. And he got down in there and was just milling around. And now I'm like, all that scent was just sitting down in there, right? All those deer that we just jumped were only 100 yards away. Like, it's all sitting in there for him. I didn't know that then, right? So I'm getting frustrated. I haul him all the way back up out of the ravine, right back to the hit site where the deer was shot originally. Haul him back, and he sits there like in the field looking at me like, what do you want me to do, right? I'm like, let's work. I asked him to work half a dozen times, and finally I snatched on the leash and like, let's go to work. And he reluctantly did, and he took us back down in that bottom and almost the exact same trail that he did the first time. And when we got up by where we bumped those deer, I'm like, I stopped too soon last time, right? Like, I should have trusted this dog, and we should have kept going a little farther. And ultimately, we had jumped that deer the first time, and he had went down in that bottom and expired down in the bottom. We had bumped him, and his last gas was down there in that bottom. And the second time we went down, there was just so much smell. We were probably within 60 yards of that deer, but couldn't see him laying down there in the bottom. At that time when I trusted him, he worked the rest of the way around and walked us to him, down into the scent pool again. We actually had to stumble across him. The hunter bumped into him laying there in a pile of brush. But in my head, I was just like, what is he doing? He was frustrating the hell out of me because I'm not patient, right? And I've had to learn.
Yeah. I asked that because I was wondering if maybe the deer wasn't dead, and he quit emitting that stress scent, and it was, and because I run into that, I heard people talk about it all the time, and my dog, when she loses, she tries really hard to find it. She wants to find the scent. So I'm still trying to sort out still learning what she's telling me. But we tracked to a wound bed, and from that wound bed, it was helter skelter. She's over here, she's over there. She was trying. She knew that she's trying. Dad wanted her to go look for something, and she's trying to find it. And now I realize, what happened is that deer bedded down. It was a high shoulder, a back whack. I think it was a high shoulder because the hunter saw the deer a few days later from the stand and told me about it. I'm like, and I suspected that was it because all the blood was looking like muscle blood, and we tried like crazy. But what I want is when the dog says, "Hey, the deer's not dead," I want her to stop tracking. So,
it'd be great.
It's easy, so I know, but and I don't know if I want that, but I just trying to learn that difference between certain, dead deer and not.
Yeah. A big thing I struggled with is, making the hunter believe, right? Like you get there and right, you get to their last blood and you don't show them any more blood. Like, is this voodoo, right? Like, I thought you guys were going to find my deep stuff, right? And I've learned that now that I can read my dog better and understand what he does, I start my tracks with that. Like, hey, if he's tracking a good scent, this is what he's going to look like. And if he starts to lose it, this is what he's going to look like. And here's why he could lose it, right? And then the good thing for me is my dog don't make a noise unless we jump a deer. The only time he's going to make a noise is if we jump a live deer or I'm holding him back from a dead one that's very, very close to us, right? Those are the only two scenarios. And it's great because I get to start that with the hunter and I tell him those things before we leave. I'm saying, like, if you're going to watch the dog work, like, just these are the things to look for, right? So when he opens up and now we're kind of sprinting, that hunter believes I know what I'm talking about when I say, hey, we're chasing a live deer here, right? Because we've set the groundwork back at the tailgate. I'm not just telling them out there in the middle of the woods because we can't find his deer, right? That we're tracking a live deer. So that's kind of one of the things I now start with. I really love making believers out of hunters, people that have never seen a dog work, or you go a mile on nothing. We had a good one last year, a liver hit one that knew was 100% liver just based on how he acted. He laid down right away in multiple beds, and the guy just kept going too early, bumped him 2 times. I said, that second bump, that could be a mile, right? And we did not see any blood at all for a mile. And he's like, really? Come on. And I could just tell he's looking at me like I got, spikes growing in my head, right? And it was almost exactly a mile. Like, we're walking through the woods, and I could tell Winston's tracking pretty good, pretty confident. And the guy was just like, man, you think he's still on it? You think he's still on it? He asked me half a dozen times. I said, well, I don't know that I can't tell you 100% yes. I said, but I know he's our best shot. So let's, just keep going. And we're almost to a T at the 1 mile mark. I look at the phone. I say, well, we're right at the mile. And look at this little stone wall crossing, and there's a spot of blood. Like, it's crazy, right? Like, this deer didn't drip a drop of blood that we could see for a mile. And then on the stone wall, it looked like somebody took a paintbrush and wiped it all over the stone wall, like, just to show us, like, hey, you're on the right track here. I'm guessing he stumbled, as he went over the wall. He must have stumbled and kind of laid his belly into the stone there. But from that stone wall, we go 75 yards and bump him up out of a logging road and watch him stand up and run away from us.
Oh, no.
The hunter never saw him, but the dog's going hot. And I tell him, said, he just jumped him. He's out in front of us. And at that point, I'm like, man, he's been bumped 3 or 4 times. And another thing that I've learned is kind of parking lot it there, right? I should have just sat down and taken a half an hour, even though my dog goes crazy. Like, he's going to bark for a half an hour and go nuts, and I'm not going to be able to calm him down. I should have taken a half an hour and then seen if I could have advanced the line and seen what we could see. Instead, I told the hunter, I'm confident he's going to be a dead deer at some point. Like, let's just let me come back in the morning, right? Can you meet me first thing in the morning? I'll be here at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'll come back out and we'll tie some ribbon up where we are, and we'll go, and we'll see. And I never advanced it. And we came out in the morning, and he was 150 yards. He had died when we jumped him out of that bed. He ran to his death and kind of fell in this little crevice behind a rock. And we could have found him that night if I'd have just been a little more patient. If I'd have just said, hey, let's give him 30 minutes and go look for him for a couple hundred yards, right? And if we can't find him in a couple hundred, then let's go home.
But he didn't go anywhere. There's that adage.
Right. And the coyotes didn't get him, right? The coyotes didn't get him. I felt awful in the morning if coyotes had gotten him overnight. It was a successful track. It was great, but experience, right? Now if I bump one, I'll give him 30 minutes. If I can see him, he let us get that close, he's not feeling good. That's the way I usually tell hunters, right? Normal deer don't let you get in eyesight of them when you're running through the woods with a dog making a bunch of noise walking, right? Like, if they did, you'd be able to shoot them all the time, right? Like, that's not what happens. So whenever there's unusual deer behavior, I say, that deer's not feeling good, right? He's not the healthiest deer because he's not acting like a deer, right? He's acting like something that's hurt.
That's right. That's right. Well, cool. So, we have a few minutes left here. We'll have to start to wind it down, or they won't let me upload the video. But so what do your training regimen look like now with a 6-year-old dog and 6 years into tracking? What do you guys do now for your practice tracks?
I would love to say I lay 3 tracks a week and we're out there hammering away, but that's not the case. It's when we end the season in January, Winston is very much my wife's dog. Around the house, he follows her everywhere.
Okay, all right.
The bed. The first day we go on a track, though, he goes outside in the morning and he'll sit next to the tire of that truck, and he won't let the truck move without him going in it, So he gets amped up pretty good that time of year. And he started to learn that, after January, we don't do a whole lot throughout the winter. When we're done and our season ends, January 1st is December 31st is our holiday hunt. It's over from there till probably first part of May. I think I've laid 2 tracks with him so far since January to now, and both of them have been in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And one was right behind the house, and it was because there's a hoof in the freezer, and my wife wanted it out of there, so we laid a track.
Yeah.
And then
okay, we'll use it. Yep.
Yeah, and then last week we used the same one and went over to a piece of state land and laid it. And some of it's just for me too, right? I want to get out there and get behind the lead and go, but he gets excited about that first track. It's much fun for him. But now, after we've done that first training track and now the second one, he's become my dog again. So he's following me around the house for the last 2 weeks, right? Because he knows it. He knows what he's doing. And I'm not saying, right, anytime behind your dog is good time, right? So it's, should I be training more with him? Probably, but I got 2 little kids.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you.
Would he be a better dog? Could we have found 1 or 2 more that we've left in the woods? We leave 2 in the woods that we know of each year for the last 3 years. Guys called us and said, I think 2 years ago we left 3 in the woods that, if I was better, could we have found those deer? For sure, right? I made mistakes, and the dog got us close, and I just didn't follow him long enough, So certainly,
I get it, man.
Yeah, certainly I'm no pro at it for sure, but and we probably could be doing some more practices. But I think right now,
and I didn't ask to pass judgment at all, because with where you're at in the season, that one of the most my dog wants out. One of the most accomplished trackers in the state of Michigan, very well respected. Tracks in Kentucky as well. He doesn't do a lot with his dogs. He lets them be dogs this time of year. And he openly. I've listened to his podcast. I've watched his. I follow him on Facebook and stuff. And experience that. I do it now because I want to learn. I got to learn my dog, man. I consider it to be about me, not her. Other than that, notwithstanding that little age track problem I talked about, but I want, and plus I just love doing it. So that's great, man.
He still tracks. We get outside, and so we got a little bit of property, and kids run a golf cart around, and he wants to chase that thing worse than that all the time. So if he's in the house and he hears it, and they happen to put it away, he'll run up and he'll put his nose right to the ground, and he'll do the same lap that golf cart just did and track it right into the barn. It's just what dogs do. Right? Rabbit comes to the yard,
absolutely.
He's gonna find where it left the property. He's gonna do it. But
cool.
I don't do a ton of training with him this time of year now, right? He's gonna be 6 here pretty quick, but certainly the first 3 years.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing. He knows his job. Sure.
I say now, I don't know that I'll track the rest of my life. I'll track until I can't walk anymore, right? Until I feel like I'm not a service to others. It's just got me bit that hard.
Yep.
But I don't know that I'll ever rely on a 1 or 2 year old dog to be my main tracking dog, if I can avoid it, right? So at some point, I start to bring in a young dog here at some point and get him some experience and
start that succession.
Totally reliant on a 1 or 2 year old dog. I think by the time, for me, I've only had one dog doing this. So again, I'm not an expert, but what I've seen out of my dog when he was 3, it really clicked for him, right? Was,
and that gets me excited because that's what I got to look forward to, man. I'm at the bottom. I have all of this cool stuff to look forward to, and you're just another validation of it, man. So I appreciate it. So a few minutes left here, just a couple minutes. So one thing that Hunter's asked me, and we talked about it a little bit, I'd be curious. What is your take? Hunter's asked me, hey, how does I don't want to bring a dog out because I'm afraid it's going to bother my hunting area. what's your assessment of that? How do you think using a tracking dog, a trained tracking dog, I want to qualify that. How would you respond to a hunter that brings that up?
Yeah. So if they said that to me, I'd get a little reluctant, like, why are you calling, right? But I think the problem is not the dog, it's human, right? If you're throwing a bunch of humans smell, there's coyotes in the woods, like you said, right? There's dogs out there all the time. You're throwing a bunch of human set in the woods, but you do that with anything, right? Like if you're going to go track a dog through the open field, you're throwing human scent out there that deer is going to smell 2 days later as well, right? So if you're marching into their bedroom, my answer when we were talking about this before is, if you shot that deer, to me, you owe it to the deer to go take a look for the deer, right? If he's not worth you ruining your honey hole for, then we shouldn't have shot him in the first place. But as far as scent goes, again, a trained tracking dog that's going to walk right to it, way better than grid searching through there, right? So if you're concerned about it, I would say a dog is your best bet, as opposed to just going in there blind with 3 or 4 of your buddies trying to turn the deer up, right? But if that's what you're concerned about, I don't know that. Is that where the ethical thing is?
Yeah. If you're not letting me come out, you don't want
to my neighbors, right? I don't want him going to my neighbors because he's going to get shot. I know there's a bigger buck in there, so I'm going to leave this one laying in there. I'd have a tough time hearing somebody say that. Yeah, but we talked about this. I've told hunters where dog goes hot, I know we're chasing a live deer and we're heading into a thick bedding area. I've told hunters, hey, look, we're chasing a live deer right now. In my opinion, for what it's worth to you, that this deer is more than likely going to survive based on what we've seen. It's high shoulder, high back, whatever it is. I'm loving this. I can go run this deer for another mile, but we're going to blow through here and you're going to lose it for a couple of days, right? Maybe a week. I don't know what that does, but that's your call, right? At that point.
Right. And that's different. Now everything suggests a live deer, and at that point you're chasing it for something to do as opposed to low probability recovery, I'll say. So that's different. Well, cool, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on, man. You're gonna have to wind her down a little bit, man, and we'll have to stay in touch and do this again, maybe after the season or just before the season starts, and just get together again. I've had a lot of fun with this, and pleasure meeting you, man, and chatting.
Pleasure meeting you, and I appreciate you just putting content out there, right? I think I look back to where I was 5 or 6 years ago, and these were the things I was just like, there wasn't enough of it, right? Just anything that I could consume, that's what I was looking for. So I appreciate
that's where I'm at right now. It's a compulsive disorder for me, buddy. So any parting words, Dave, before we wrap it up?
I would just say, give it some time, right? All these hunters, anybody that's in question, give it some time. Call your local tracker, talk to somebody. The best hunters in the world haven't seen as many tracks as a good tracker has, right? Guys that have been tracking for 10 years have seen 300 tracks, 400 tracks, 500 tracks. They know some stuff. Use that knowledge to your benefit. Give them a call. Every tracker I know, and me personally, I love fielding phone calls, whether it's just to talk to somebody about, hey, this is what I think, or hey, go after it on your own type stuff. If we think it's that dead, we don't need to come there. So I would just say, use that knowledge that's out there.
Perfect. And we'll, when I post this, when I upload this to the podcast, Dave, if you want to, I can put some links to your tracking page and stuff in the description. And then when I promote it, we can tag your tracking page and your friends and followers can see it and stuff too. So,
awesome. Appreciate it.
So cool. Just hang with me for a minute here, buddy. We'll, I'm going to wind it down. We're going to wrap it up, and then, we'll talk business for a few minutes afterwards. But anyway, guys, friends, fans and followers, thanks for listening. Check out Dave's tracking page and all the good things that he's doing there, and continue to follow along, share the podcast, give us a thumbs up. Feel free to comment. Feel free to go to Tales on Trails Deer Tracking on Facebook and YouTube. We will post this video podcast there as well, and we'll share it to Dave's tracking page too, guys. So again, Dave, pleasure having you on. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. It's a ton of fun. We could spend another 3 hours talking about this stuff. I know we could. So we'll do it again, man. Thanks a lot, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
See you, pal. Stay with me.